All right, let's dive right into this. Guys, ever since I started doing these, people are always asking me, what is literally the scariest, most haunted movie ever made? Now, I usually throw out names like The Conjuring or maybe Amityville, but honestly, there is one movie that just sits at the absolute top of the list for pure, unadulterated horror. I'm talking about The Exorcist from 1973. It was so far ahead of its time that even today it genuinely makes people tremble. But guys, what I'm about to decode for you in this explainer is the 100% true, absolutely terrifying sequence of events behind it. This is the real story from 1949, a story so dark, even the filmmakers were too scared to show the whole thing. So, are you ready? Okay, I want you to literally imagine this for a second. It's the dead of night, your whole house is pitch black, everyone's asleep, including you. And then you hear a sound, just a faint scratching noise coming from down the hall. Now, at first you'd probably just brush it off, think it's a mouse, roll over, try to go back to sleep, right? But then the scratching comes back. And this time, there's crying mixed in with it. So you get up, you go to check, and you realize it's not a mouse. It's coming from your own child's bedroom. You open the door and ask them, hey, what are you doing? Why are you crying? And why are you scratching at the floor? And here is the absolutely shocking part. Your child looks up at you, completely terrified, and says, I am not doing this. Someone is making me do this. I mean, seriously, what would you even do in that situation? Guys, that exact chilling phrase is what kicked off the horrific, fully documented events of 1949. Like, this is not fiction. This is the very real nightmare of a boy whose true identity was actually sealed by officials just to protect him. So for this explainer, we're just going to call him Roland. So let's take a look at who this was actually happening to. Our main guy here is 14-year-old Roland. And honestly, he was just a totally ordinary kid. He went to school, studied, joked around with his friends, and came home just like any other teenager. But I have to remind you guys right now, everything we're decoding today is strictly based on real documented facts. The true story is so insanely complex and disturbing that authorities literally had to erase his real name from public records. Just put yourself in his shoes for a second. Imagine being just 14 years old and having to face what he was about to face. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the dark trigger for all of this was just so incredibly simple. See, Roland didn't really have a lot of kids his own age to hang out with at home. But one day, his mother's sister, Aunt Harriet, though everyone affectionately called her Aunt Tilly, came over to visit. She hands him this box and says, hey, I brought you a board game. It's called a Ouija board. With this, you can actually communicate with people from the other side. So they played it together. But Roland, he just treated it like a total joke. He had absolutely no idea that this simple little game was about to upend his entire existence. Because after that, things escalated terrifyingly fast. First, Aunt Tilly completely unexpectedly passed away. And get this, to this day, our research shows her cause of death remains entirely unexplained. Then, shortly after the funeral, that horrifying scratching sound started in Roland's home. And it wasn't just scratching. Next came the terrifying knocks. It got to the point where one night his mother was just so desperate, she literally shouted at the empty hallway, if this is you, Tilly, knock 3 times on the door. Instantly, 3 distinct knocks echoed through the house. Boom, boom, boom. And soon after, the supernatural chaos started spilling over into his school. Teachers started calling his mother in a sheer panic. Roland was suddenly throwing things, tormenting other kids, and get this, speaking in a deep, demonic voice in a completely different language. Naturally, his mother picked him up and rushed him straight to a medical professional. But the school psychologist basically looked at him and claimed Roland was 100% fine. But his mother knew the truth. She knew the undeniable paranormal reality of the flying objects and those unnatural, guttural voices happening inside her own home. Completely unsatisfied with that medical brush-off, she picked up the phone and reached out to Father Luther Miles Schultz. Now, Father Schultz immediately suspected that a very real demonic force was trying to destroy this family. So he offered to observe Roland for 1 night at his own rectory. Guys, this is where it goes completely off the rails. Schultz puts Roland to bed, but the second he steps out of the room, he hears the bed violently slamming against the floor. He rushes back in, but the bed is perfectly still. Knowing something was totally off, he told Roland to sleep in a heavy rocking chair instead. But suddenly, that chair didn't just rock back and forth, it started spinning in complete circles, literally physically impossible. Roland was violently thrown to the floor, and when Father Schultz ran over to check on him, the poor kid was suddenly covered in deep, unexplained scratches. The very next day, they rushed Roland to another priest, Father Hughes. The instant Roland sat down at Father Hughes's desk, the telephone literally flew off the table and smashed onto the floor. Roland's head snapped up, and he immediately began speaking in that terrifying demonic voice again. Father Hughes knew right then and there that they were dealing with an incredibly powerful entity. He immediately began praying, and as he did, Roland's body reacted violently. Red marks literally began to rise up out of the boy's flesh. The scratches formed a clear, undeniable word right there on his skin. It spelled out Lewis. Guys, this was a direct message. Taking that flesh-carved message literally, the family packed up and relocated to St. Louis, Missouri. But, of course, the supernatural chaos followed them right to their relative's front door. Desperate, they reached out to the senior archbishop, who immediately brought in Father Bowthern. So the crucial point here is how methodically they prepared to face this thing. They followed the strict ancient Roman rituals. Step 1, they gathered the crucifixion cross. Step 2, they secured the holy water. And step 3, they prepared the Bible. They absolutely knew they could not afford a single mistake. And once those rituals began, the exorcism escalated in the most horrifying ways imaginable over the next 3 days. First, Roland literally levitated, floating completely off his bed, before crashing violently back down. The entity was clearly growing stronger. Then, the demon tried to play mind games. On the third day, there was this weird, false peace. Roland acted like a completely normal 14-year-old boy again, playing, jumping around, eating. But guys, as soon as the sun went down, he snapped. He became completely feral, violently trying to bite anyone who even dared to step near him. People in the room reported that the ground itself felt like it was vibrating. The parents were beyond desperate at this point. The priest decided they needed backup, so they called in Professor Baub. He was a scientist and a paranormal investigator who had deep knowledge of these types of events. But just as Professor Baub sat down, started taking his notes, and beginning his own rituals, a massive, heavy lamp flew completely across the room and shattered into pieces right next to his head. That was the breaking point. Father Bowden realized this entity was way too powerful to fight inside a normal house. They had to move Roland. So they transferred him to a local Catholic hospital that had a secure psych ward, praying we could finally contain the situation. Once they got him inside that psych ward, Roland was at it again, levitating in the air, perfectly still, just hovering there. That's when the priests made a critical, desperate move. They brought in a statue and placed it directly in front of him. This was the statue of St. Michael, known in faith as the ultimate spiritual warrior who defeats demons. And guys, the presence of this specific statue, it was about to trigger the ultimate terrifying clash. The climax of this whole ordeal was absolutely extreme. The exact moment the demon inside Roland laid eyes on that statue of St. Michael, Roland began aggressively foaming at the mouth. His body contorted in ways that shouldn't be physically possible, and his skin literally changed color. Then, the most shocking thing of all happened. Roland started speaking in this booming, powerful new language, and the voice, it didn't sound like that raspy demon anymore. It sounded like St. Michael himself. The priests knew this was their one window. They seized the moment, bound Roland with a sacred purple cloth, and began aggressively splashing him with holy water, screaming for the spirit to leave. And then, instantly, Roland dropped from the air. He fell heavily back onto the hospital bed. Everything in that chaotic, screaming room went completely dead silent. And from Roland's mouth, a soft, quiet, perfectly normal voice simply whispered, "He is gone." Just like that, the boy was completely free. But hold on, because the story has one final, incredibly eerie detail. At the exact moment the demon was defeated in that ward, an incredibly loud, booming sound echoed through the entire hospital building, sending doctors and nurses running in sheer panic. And right after that, a witness came running into the ward from a nearby church. They reported seeing a massive, towering shadow cast across the church walls. And guys, it was the unmistakable shadow of St. Michael holding a sword. The priests quietly locked the ritual books and that statue inside the ward, and they literally never spoke of it again. The media caught whispers over the years, but the full, terrifying truth stayed locked in that room. And this brilliantly illustrates the most amazing part of this entire true story. You would think someone who went through this kind of severe demonic possession would be institutionalized or traumatized forever, right? But the fact is, Roland went back to a completely normal life. He finished his schooling, moved completely past his horrific chapter, and guys, he grew up to become a highly successful rocket scientist for NASA, literally building rockets. He was completely successful, and absolutely nothing supernatural ever bothered him again for the rest of his entire life. So I have to ask you guys, look at the facts we've decoded today. Honestly, is the terrifying true story even scarier than the movie itself? I really want you to think about that. Thank you so much for joining me and diving into this true horror explainer. If you're a focused learner who loves unpacking these factual mysteries and uncovering the dark reality hiding right behind the fiction, keep searching, keep asking questions, and I will definitely meet you in our next deep dive. Stay curious, guys.